We live in a world that's constantly pushing us towards comfort, towards instant gratification. But there's this ancient philosophy that offers a radical alternative. It's a set of brutal, battle-tested laws for forging a mind that's absolutely unbreakable. And these aren't just some feel-good quotes. This is like a whole new operating system for thriving in chaos.
So let me ask you, does this sound at all familiar? The endless scrolling on your phone, the constant comparison to other people, this chase for comfort that somehow just leaves you feeling more tired and more exhausted than ever before. We're pretty much conditioned to avoid pain, right? But what if that's the very thing that's keeping us weak? The ancient Stoics, they were convinced it was, and they had a way out.
All right, so here's our game plan. First, we're going to diagnose the modern struggle. Then, we'll dive into mastering your mind, training for the reality of life, living with a real sense of purpose, and finally, becoming truly unshakable. Okay, let's dive right in. Section 1, the modern struggle. Why is it that so many of us feel kind of lost, even though we have more opportunities and comforts than any generation in history? Well, the core of the problem, as the Stoics saw it, is this fundamental mismatch between what our world tells us to chase and what actually builds real, lasting strength. And this quote from the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius, who was, arguably one of the most powerful men in history, it just gets right to the heart of it. He understood that real power isn't about controlling what happens out there. That's just impossible. It's about mastering your internal world. This is the first and honestly the most crucial Stoic law. And that right there brings us to section 2, and honestly our first real battleground, mastering the mind. Everything, and I mean everything, starts right here. This is where strength is either forged or it's forfeited. So the Stoics had this super simple but incredibly powerful tool they called the Dichotomy of Control. They just divided everything into 2 buckets. Think about it for a second. How much of your day do you spend worrying about the stuff on the right? What someone thinks of you? If the economy's gonna tank? Or even just the weather? The big Stoic insight is that pretty much all our anxiety comes from focusing on that column. The path to strength is to shift 100% of your focus to the column on the left. Your thoughts, your choices, your response. That is the only territory you truly command. Okay, this next one, it's a brutal truth, but it's also incredibly liberating. It's from Epictetus, a man who was literally born a slave. He's saying that every time you let a rude comment or a traffic jam or some piece of bad news completely ruin your mood, you are willingly handing over the keys to your own mind. You're making that person or that event your master. Now, this is a huge misunderstanding people have about Stoicism. It is not about becoming a robot or suppressing your feelings. Not at all. It's about creating just a little bit of space between a feeling and your reaction to it. Imagine your emotions are like clouds passing in the sky. You aren't the cloud, you're the sky. You can see the anger cloud, you can acknowledge it's there, but you don't have to become the thunderstorm. And that little shift from blind reaction to intentional response, that's the foundation of mental freedom. Okay, so we're working on the inner world, but what about, the outer world? The Stoics believed in actively training for life, not just passively hoping things go well. This next idea from Marcus Aurelius, honestly, it might be one of the most powerful concepts in all of Stoicism. What stands in the way becomes the way. So that project at work that seems completely impossible, that's your chance to learn how to be resourceful. That difficult conversation you've been avoiding, that's your training ground for courage. See, the obstacle isn't blocking your path. The obstacle is the path. It's the raw material you use to grow stronger. And look, here's another one of those brutal laws. The world is not fair, and you have to stop expecting it to be. Waiting around for life to be fair is just a recipe for resentment and bitterness. The Stoic accepts the rules of the game, that bad things can happen to good people and good things to bad people, and they just focus on their next move. It's not about blaming yourself, it's about taking back control, because no matter what happens, it's always your move. So how do you actually train for this unfair world? Well, you practice hardship, but on your terms. Think of it like a vaccine for adversity. Taking a freezing cold shower, fasting for a day, or even just sitting with boredom without immediately grabbing your phone. These small, voluntary bits of discomfort build what the Stoics called an inner citadel, basically a fortress inside your mind, so that when a real crisis hits, you don't shatter. You've been training for this all along. All right, so we're building this inner strength. Now what? Where do we point it? Stoicism isn't just about enduring life, it's about living it with this urgent sense of purpose.
And to make sure they lived with that purpose every single day, the Stoics had this powerful, unflinching reminder they used, a mental tool designed to just cut through all the noise and focus the mind on what actually matters.
It's called Memento Mori. Remember, you will die. I know, it sounds super morbid, right? But it's actually the ultimate tool for clarity. Think about it. If you knew you only had a limited number of days left on this earth, would you waste them on petty arguments, or endless scrolling, or just totally meaningless tasks? This thought isn't meant to be depressing. It's meant to be focusing. It's a filter that helps you sort the essential from the trivial.
And Marcus Aurelius, he just puts it so bluntly. He says, this isn't some hypothetical for the distant future. You could leave life right now. Let that single fact guide everything you do. Would you really get into that stupid online argument? Would you put off that important conversation with someone you love? This one thought is such a powerful antidote to procrastination and wasting your life on trivial nonsense.
This leads to such a radical shift in how you see everything. I mean, our culture is completely obsessed with outcomes, right? The promotion, the number of followers, winning the game. But all of that is external, and ultimately, it's not in our control. The Stoic flips this whole idea on its head. They fall in love with the process. Did you prepare for that meeting as best you could? That's the win. Did you put in the work today? That's the win. Your self-worth gets tied to your effort, which you control, not the results, which you don't.
And what does this all point to? It points to virtue. And I'm not talking about some old-fashioned stuffy morality here. For the Stoics, virtue just meant living with excellence, being honest, being fair, being courageous, and being wise. In a world that's just chasing likes and approval, the Stoic is a warrior for their own character. They do the right thing even when, and maybe especially when, nobody is watching.
Okay, so where does all this lead? What's the end game here? That brings us to our final section, becoming unshakable.
And this right here, this is the real payoff. It's not about getting rich or famous. It's a quiet, unshakable integrity. It's the strength of a soul that chooses the hard right thing over the easy wrong thing, again and again and again. That is true power.
But let's be totally clear. This path isn't easy. It doesn't promise you comfort or a life without pain. What it offers is something so much more valuable, a life of deep, profound purpose, and a mind that can withstand any storm.
So, it all comes back to that one core question, the most important one really. Knowing that your time is limited, and that your real power isn't in what happens to you, but in how you respond. What will you do with the time you have left? The choice, as always, is yours.